Good evening and welcome to Very Interesting. I'm Barry Aycock, your host. We have 2 episodes left in this season, and you probably can't tell, but I'm really excited about both of them. Tonight's episode features an interview with Senator-elect Holly Rehder from Sikeston. But first, I had an opportunity recently to talk with a new friend of mine, Gary Figgins, the publisher of Show Me Missouri magazine. I'd like to welcome Gary Figgins to Very Interesting. Gary, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Good to
coming.
be here.
Gary is the owner and operator of the Show Me Missouri magazine. It's the travel magazine of Missouri. You're a great source for travel for everybody in the state of Missouri or outside the state of Missouri. When did you start this magazine?
But the first issue came out winter of 1998, and we've been printing ever since, 4 times a year. Yes. And it's a quarterly magazine and seasonal, so we try to stay within season on all the stories.
And tell us, it's a very interesting story to me because I was a big fan of the Carnahans. Tell me about your very first magazine that you put out.
The very first magazine, I'm out of Kennett, my office is in Kennett, and I shared a building with a former newspaper publisher, Jack Stapleton, who at the time, after he left newspaper industry, became a political writer and also managed a political newsletter. And so we shared a building and we'd shout across the hallway to each other and mentioned to him, the first issue is getting ready to come out, and I was trying to come up with a cover story. Being the first issue, it would really be neat, being a Christmas issue, it'd be neat to do a story about Christmas in the governor's mansion. But I don't really know how to make those contacts. He said, well, let me make some calls and I'll get back with you. So probably 10, 15 minutes later, he comes back in and he says, you're going to be getting a call from the governor's mansion, and just take the call and they've got some things worked out for you. Sure enough, the call came, and it was First Lady Jean Carnahan's chief of staff, and Mrs. Carnahan was going to write the story about spending Christmas in a borrowed home. Most people go home for Christmas, and families go home, and the kids go home. For their family, they came to a borrowed home to have Christmas. And so she wrote a great article. Jean Carnahan is probably one of the foremost authorities on the history of the governor's mansion. And so she had a whole lot of interesting information about the history that she worked into her Christmas story, and about the grandkids running down the staircase, and the giant Christmas tree in the main foyer. And just, it was a great story, and it was just totally unexpected, but it came about because one man in Kennett had the connection to make the call.
So when you started this magazine, did you just see that there was a need in the state of Missouri, or is it something near and dear to your heart? How did you just wake up one morning and say, Missouri needs a travel magazine?
I had published a magazine for New Madrid County. It was more of a marketing piece for the Chamber of Commerce, and a friend of mine who's also a former newspaperman was the he was the deputy director of the Missouri Division of Tourism, and he saw the New Madrid publication and called me and said, there's no publication, statewide tourism publication in the state of Missouri, why don't you look into that? And so that's really where the idea began. Bob Smith was a very, very good friend of mine, a mentor of mine. My 3 main mentors were all newspapermen. Jack Stapleton, who we mentioned earlier. My first mentor was my first boss, the publisher of the Crothersville newspaper, Ralph Clayton. And got to know all 3 of those gentlemen very well. But Bob when the magazine started, Bob was kind of the go-to guy as far as coming up with ideas and where to make some changes, because he knew the industry so well. He was a publisher at heart, but he was also deeply engraved into the tourism industry.
Well, Gary, what is the dollar amount of the tourism industry in the state of Missouri?
Tourism prior to COVID brought in roughly $13.5 billion, working off of a $20 million budget for the Missouri Division of Tourism. Now that budget has been cut drastically over the past year due to the COVID restraints and reduced revenue in the state of Missouri, but it's $13.5 billion industry, and a lot of people don't realize that tourism is the second largest, at least prior to COVID, was the second largest industry in the state of Missouri, behind agriculture.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Gary, because everybody in Missouri knows where Branson is, the St. Louis Arch, the big ones that everybody talks about, but I feel like after I've read some of your magazines, I'm kind of dumb on all the great treasures we have here in the state of Missouri. You cover them really well. As you know, I'm enamored by the wild horses of Missouri. And reading through some of your magazines, there's so many places that people that live here, like you said, even 2 hours away, we don't even think about. We got that state treasure right here close, or some of them are far away, but we've got some within 2 hours, you said.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people in this area don't realize. We all know Branson, we all know Kansas City and St. Louis and Columbia. Major Springfield is another major travel destination in the state of Missouri, but a lot of people don't realize how much the rural communities, the outlying parts of the state, rely on tourism and how much they offer. Just within a 2-hour drive of here, you have the wild horses over at Eminence and the fantastic old historic mills in that part of the area, Dillard Mill, Alley Spring Mill. North of here, north of Poplar Bluff, you have the Civil War battlefield at Pilot Knob. You have Elephant Rock State Park. You have Tom Sauk Mountain. Which is interesting that Tom Sauk Mountain is the highest elevation in the state of Missouri, and then southern Dunklin County is the lowest elevation in the state of Missouri, all within 2 hours of each other.
Yeah, and we've even got some of these standbys that I haven't been to, I'm ashamed to say, the Truman Library.
The Truman Library.
Only president we've ever had from Missouri. And
a lot of people don't realize we have a presidential library here in Missouri in Independence, and it just went through a multi-million-dollar expansion, renovation. And they've done a soft opening. They're getting ready to do their major opening as we're speaking now. But beautiful facility and a lot of history there, not just of Truman, but of his connections to World War II and to Winston Churchill. There's another connection with World War II when you get up into Fulton. You have Westminster College, and you have the Winston Churchill Memorial that's there, and it's just a fantastic archive of not just Churchill, but of World War II.
Missouri is such a diverse state. I mean, you don't think about tourism all the time in ways that a person could, because you got agritourism. We have a lot of wine trails here, right?
Right, have several wine trails. Former Lieutenant Governor Joe Maxwell had a good saying, and he said this at a speech in Kennett, and it really stuck with me, that if the United States is the melting pot of the world, then Missouri is the melting pot of the United States. And it really made the melting pot of America. It really made a connection, because we do. We have the metro areas, we have the rural areas, we have these different connections to countries. You have the Hill in St. Louis, you have German heritage in Herman, you have French heritage in St. Genevieve, you've got a Spanish connection in St. Charles. So there's a lot of truth to what he said, that if America is the melting pot of the world, then Missouri is the melting pot of America.
Well, Gary, thanks for being here today. It's very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to seeing where Gary takes us over the next few months. He's going to show us many exciting places in Missouri. And please look for his magazine, Show Me Missouri Magazine. And now, I had the honor to talk to the state senator-elect from Sikeston, Holly Rehder. I'd like to welcome Holly Rehder, state representative, here to Very Interesting. Holly, congratulations on your Senate victory.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You just beat Kathy Swan. It was a narrow victory, 141 votes. So
yes, very much a narrow victory, but a victory, and one I'm very proud of.
Congratulations. I was rooting for you. I didn't know Kathy Swan. I know you well. Holly always calls me for advice. She wants to make sure that whatever advice I give her, she does just the opposite, right?
Not true at all. It's been wonderful having you as a friend, because you and I agree on so many things, and I think that that's what is so incredible and important about the show that you do, the multiple shows that you do, is because I think that at our core we are humans, and we want what's best for each other. And as Democrats and Republicans, we go about it in different ways. We think there are different ways to obtain that goal, but our goals are to help others. And so very much enjoyed our friendship and the fact that we can talk policy even when we disagree and learn from each other.
We've known each other for a long time. We disagree all the time. I'll never forget that one time you told me that, Barry, you think I'm crazy, but I know you're crazy when it comes to politics. So we have a lot of fun with it. It's actually, when you call me, I don't answer everybody's call because a lot of times I don't know who it is, but I always look forward to seeing your name pop up because I know that you've got something really interesting on your mind.
Well, I always love for us to talk, and I know I'm going to win you over one of these days.
Oh, we'll see. So tell us a little bit about, where you were raised, your family, because I know you got deep roots here.
Yes, so my mom and daddy's from Southeast Missouri. My daddy was from New Madrid County, he was from Lilburn, and my mama was from Saxton. And I was born in Memphis, spent my youngest years in Dallas, and then when my mother and stepdad got divorced, we moved to Southeast Missouri, and from there, and that was about the 3rd grade, and from there we moved 30 times between the end of my 3rd grade year and the beginning of my 10th grade year. And my mother struggled with mental illness, and so when things went south, she'd put us on a Greyhound and we'd go somewhere else. So I've lived from California to Florida.
Wow, you've seen the whole United States, haven't you?
I've been everywhere.
Keep U-Haul in business.
We certainly Greyhound. We didn't have enough for a U-Haul, but we traveled via Greyhound, and I've had some pretty interesting situations, but God has certainly blessed me and kept his hand on me through the whole time.
So tell us a little bit about your family. I know your husband's a big part of your campaigns.
Yes, he is. I'm actually more introverted, and Ray is very much, he loves the crowds. He loves campaign rallies. He really, one of our biggest fights was over politics right after we started dating, and that was because I'd been raised not in politics. They were very foreign to me. I mean, we never talked about voting. We never talked about any of that. I mean, we struggled. I grew up on welfare and lived in, probably every trailer park in Southeast Missouri, and that was my life, was nothing politics. He grew up learning about politics and loving it and being a part of it. And, it took me a little while to understand how politics and policy really do affect our lives, really do affect not only our bottom lines financially, but our children's futures. And so that was something that he taught me that we actually used to get into arguments about, but we're very much on the same page now.
Well, I noticed when you went to 𝐶MO, you were on the debate team, so maybe that helped you with him later on, right?
It did.
So how many kids do you and Ray have?
We have, I have 3 children and then 3 grandchildren. My oldest daughter, Rachel, she is 35, and then my middle son is 29, and then Ray's, and my youngest, Christian, is 23, and he just graduated from Missouri State, and he works for the Trump administration in DC. And entry-level job, but super cool, of course, for a young man, 23, living in DC. Scares mama to death, but he really loves it. And then Caden, my oldest grandson, is 11, and just the light of my life. And then I've got 2 grandbabies that were born a week apart, one the end of February and one the 1st of March.
That's great. You have a great family.
I do.
Very supportive of you, too.
Very blessed, yes.
So Holly, we've talked about your political story. As far as coming from nothing, you just said you lived in every trailer park in Southeast Missouri. You're not really exaggerating when you say that. You've got a great political story and great political background, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. But there's a lot of political issues that made you see the light that you needed to get involved in politics. You started working for the Emersons.
Yes.
But what are some of those political issues that really just fired you up? I've got to get involved.
One of the things that is just so much at my core is helping people to understand that so often government reliance removes people from ever rising to their potential. I watched as woman after woman in my family took the easier path and never made it out of poverty, even though they were brilliant, brilliant women. But when you have those options and that's the way you've been trained, a lot of times you take that easier path. But for me, I had to quit school at 15 to help take care of my family. We'd gotten in a really bad car accident, and my mother was going to have to go into a nursing home, and my little sister and I would have been split up. And so I got married, quit school, took care of my mom. Well, then I got pregnant right after that, and so I had my first baby at 16. So at 16, I was a high school dropout mom and headed down the same path that I had been raised in. And so I wanted something different for my daughter, and I put my head down and I worked and I trusted God, and I got myself out of that. And it took me 17 years I took my GED. It took me 17 years to get my college degree because I did it while raising 3 babies and working more than a full-time job. And I think teaching people who have never, I didn't have anyone around me that worked. You know, my dad wasn't in my life growing up. I didn't have any role models to look at that worked. And so, and many people have it much worse than I did. I had a mother in my life. But for the kids growing up that don't have those role models in their life, teaching them that working and self-reliance is so powerful. It's so powerful. The first time I was able to buy my daughter a Happy Meal, I remember that moment. That's how important it was to me, because I had earned that paycheck and I took her to Burger King and got the kids' meal, and which was walking distance from her home. But that was so powerful for me as a mother to be able to do that. And so those are things that have been important. Welfare reform has been important to me. The way that we put the benchmarks in place, teaching people to make sure that they're doing volunteering, to make sure that they're getting some education, because those are the things that open doors for future opportunities. Those have been very important to me. I also grew up in drug addiction, where my sister was an addict by the time she was 16. She married a drug dealer at 16. One of my stepdads was a drug dealer. My daughter became an addict at 17 and had 13 years of deep addiction. And I ended up taking custody of her son when he wasn't quite 2. And so, you know, I've been that grandmother raising a grandchild. And so the opioid epidemic, trying to find solutions for our families around that has been incredibly important to me, which the prescription drug monitoring program has kind of been the most talked about that I have worked on. And, you know, Missouri is the only state that doesn't have this. So these are the things that have been very important to me. And I think that as you look at the legislature, you have people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. And that's important because, in Democrat and Republican side also, because by the time a bill goes through, it's been massaged by so many people with different backgrounds that by the time it becomes legislation, you know, it's typically a much better bill than when it was filed.
So Holly, almost every step of the way from the time you were 5 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, you said your husband was kind of involved in the political process and supported candidates, but you really weren't growing up. But actually, almost every program that your mom and you were involved in had something to do with politics, right? Welfare.
Absolutely.
Medicare, Medicaid, probably maybe back then, but
food stamps,
yes,
right?
Food stamps,
absolutely.
Yes. So politics really touched you at an early age, whether you knew it was politics or not.
Exactly. Right? Yes. And until I married Ray, I had not really, or until we started dating and he and I started fighting about politics, I really didn't see the connection. I really didn't see how that. I was in survival mode. I was trying to raise my children. When he and I met, I had 2 children. I had a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I was just trying to survive, you know. Didn't have my college degree. I was working. I was going to college and working at the same time, and so I really had never thought about politics. It had never been on my radar.
GED is probably another program that you utilize, correct?
Yes, yes.
But there's another issue important to you is the pro-life issue. You've got a great pro-life story.
It is, and and that was never, at 15, pregnant, abortion was never even thought of in my mind, because I know that every human life, I know that life begins at conception. I am very much a believer of the Bible, and I know that each life is created by God, and there is no way that I am going to even think that I have any authority to do anything different with that life. And so to me, there was never a question whether to have Rachel or not. It was, I'm pregnant, I'm going to figure this out.
And you beat the statistics because you were in poverty. You're probably unemployed or close to unemployed. You were
High school dropout.
Flat broke, high school
15.
dropout. So you beat the odds on that also. But you beat the odds your whole life, correct?
Right, yes. And in sitting in the WIC program, reading the pamphlets before I got called back at the health department, I sit there and read statistic after statistic, and they were awful, but God really did. He kept his hand on me, and I was never one of those bad statistics.
So there's a lot of political issues that you learned from experience, though, right? Because I'll never forget, I believe it was in 2018, you were on the Megyn Kelly show on NBC. I remember my wife said, "Hey, Holly Rehder's on the news this morning," and it was about child marriages. You wanted to pass a law, you did pass a law that you had to have both parents' consent or a judge's consent, I forget how it goes. 15-year-old can't get married in the state of Missouri anymore, correct?
Right, right. So it's kind of weird how it happened, because that was not my bill. That was Gene Evans' bill. And, but I was happy to speak on the floor. I mean, I married my 21-year-old boyfriend when I was 15, and so I knew a little something about it. But I got a call from a reporter in Kansas City on my way home that week, and he said, "Hey, Representative Rehder, wanted to see if I could get a comment from you on this child bride bill, because I see that you voted against it, but I see that your district has the majority of underage marriages in the state." And I said, "Well, you've got that all wrong." I said, "Actually, I voted for it. I was one of those underage marriages, and so I'm happy to support it. I do think that we need to be older before we get married. That is very important. It very much contributes to trafficking, but even with that aside, in my case it didn't have anything to do with trafficking, but it was not the right thing, and my 15-year-old brain could not comprehend that. So you shouldn't be getting married at 15. And he said, "Well, wait a minute, I didn't realize that. I was calling you for the opposing side of you." And then he said, "Megyn Kelly's show reached out to me, and they're doing a show. Do you mind if I share your information as someone who's actually had experience in this?" And I'm like, "No, I don't care." And I never thought anything else about it. Gave him my comment and went on. And then Monday morning, Megyn Kelly's show was calling my office asking for me to come out and be on the show, and I'm like, this wasn't even my bill. But I do support it, and I do think that we need, it's important to, women have so many more opportunities now than we did when our grandparents were getting married at 15.
So Holly, I really didn't bring you here to talk to you about politics. It really is politics, but it's been too political. But
Right.
The prescription drug monitoring program for the state of Missouri, there's not one.
Right, we're the only state.
49 other states have it, Guam, Puerto Rico. Why are we the embarrassment of the United States of America not having a prescription drug monitoring program? Even Democrats support you on this. Claire McCaskill, Nicole Galloway. It shouldn't be a political issue, but it is. So explain to our audience why we're the lone state that doesn't have the program.
I wish I could explain. It's unfortunately just become that political football over the years. And so for many years, it was Senator Schaaf who was just vehemently opposed to it, said it was an infringement on privacy, even though none of these other states have had a problem with that. It is an electronic medical record, and you don't see any bills coming forward to get rid of electronic medical records. We all agree that they have very much helped advance us medically over the years. So once he was out 2 years ago, I thought for sure we were going to be able to get something done. Well, then at that point we had several other senators in the conservative caucus, and I've fought with them openly and in the news as well as on the House floor. But they were opposed, and they were opposed also because of feeling that it was an infringement on privacy. However, we have had court cases to that have failed. St. Charles County. So in Missouri, what happened several years ago, when we once again failed to pass it statewide at the legislature, St. Louis County implemented it and then opened it up for any counties that wanted to join theirs could join theirs. And so counties across Missouri started passing it locally through their county commissioners' meetings, county ordinances that allowed their health department to join in with St. Louis County's health department. So right now, we have about 87% of Missouri's population covered by the St. Louis County PD&P, health department's PD&P, which is wonderful. However, it's not 100%. So then what you find is in places like, and I can't think of a county off the top of my head that doesn't have, I think Christian County doesn't have it yet. So in southwest Missouri, if you're in Christian County, if you live in Christian County, you can still go to the doctor, and that doctor cannot see what your medications are. But if you live in Greene County, which, right there, if you go to the doctor in Greene County, your doctor can see what medications you're on. Then if somebody wanted to go around the Greene County PD&P, they could just go to Christian County and go to the doctor. And the problem with this is that, number one, physicians have testified over and over again that when they are prescribing, if they do not know your full list of medications, it is, they can give you something that counteracts. If say your 80-year-old mother is getting pain medication because of her back, and then she falls and hurts her hip and goes to a specialist, that specialist is not going to know that she's already on medication, pain medication for her back, unless she brings everything in. And I can tell you from a daughter whose mother had a sack of medicines that she always took to the doctor with her, how helpful a PD&P would have been, because there's no way my mother could have rolled all those off her tongue to say what she was on. But if you are on a opioid and maybe your psychiatrist is giving you an Ambien to help you sleep, or maybe something to help calm your nerves, those together are lethal if taken at the same time.
So Holly, what would the opposition be saying about this? I mean, we're either 47th, 48th, 49th, or 50th in drug use, arrests. Tell me what the opposition would say. Why don't we have this program in Missouri?
Well, states aren't apples to apples, of course, when it comes to how high the addiction rate is. But those opposed on the House floor have said, they feel like it's an infringement of privacy. They also have said that they feel like it harms those with chronic pain, when it doesn't. Us not having it harms those with chronic pain. And the reason is because doctors have testified that they have to make their chronic pain patients jump through hoops to make sure that they're chronic pain patients and they're not getting medications from other doctors. Where in a state like Texas or Indiana, very conservative states have had PD&Ps for many years. Their chronic pain patients, their doctors can look at their PD&P, see that yes, they're a chronic pain patient, they've not been anywhere else, prescribe with confidence, send them out the door. They're not having to fill out form after form, take drug tests, do all these different things. So none of their arguments hold water. This year, we did come to a compromise bill. We did have a good bill come out of the Senate. That bill, the only thing it changed was the way that the board was made up. So effectively, it took it out of the Department of Social Services oversight to being this private board. That was a wonderful solution, a wonderful compromise. In the process, as you know, happens in politics, in the legislature, an amendment also got added on that increased the penalties for fentanyl. Now, that amendment, it was a bill, it was Senator Onder's bill, but so towards the end of session, you start putting your bills into amendments and you start trying to tack them on to different bills that they're germane to. So Senator Onder tacked his fentanyl penalties onto the PD&P bill, compromise bill. Well, I wasn't concerned about that. I didn't care for the penalties per se, increasing the way they were, because I was afraid there would be some unintended consequences. Yes, we were trying to get at the dealers, but I thought there might be some things that get caught up in that shouldn't, that would be tougher on people that were addicted, not people that were pushing it. Anyhow, but that was attached to many different bills, two of which were already going to the governor's desk that I knew we'd already passed overwhelmingly out of the House, and so I knew that they weren't going to have a problem. They'd be at the governor's desk. So I didn't raise any red flags about that amendment because, again, that policy was already destined to make it to the governor's desk.
Did you ever think you'd ever have this much trouble trying to save lives in the state of Missouri? Did you ever think that this issue would be this political? And really one guy stopped it for the whole state, right?
Right, and it shouldn't be, because it's a bill that is truly bipartisan.
You had consensus from both sides.
Right, and so when it got back to the House, COVID hit, we all went home. I asked leadership to bring it up. I wanted it brought up immediately so we could vote on it, get it out. They're like, Holly, don't worry about it. It's going to be done.
Well,
So-
many of the players, though, aren't going to be there next session, correct?
Well, right, but then when we get back from COVID, I'm the first bill up. And then the Democrats all voted against it because of the fentanyl language. So it only needed one more vote. It only needed our vote. But I had to have the Democrats to pass it. And they didn't want to vote for the increased penalties on fentanyl. But the increased penalties on fentanyl were already at the governor's desk. So it was just a political football and died. And that was because the Democrat floor leader, Crystal Quade, she felt she could leverage it for some other things. But what she didn't understand is that our side didn't like it enough to allow it to be leveraged for anything.
So it wasn't that big a fight for a lot of your members?
No. I mean, I had to have, it was 50-50, Democrat and Republican bill. And so without either, then it doesn't pass. So when it comes to next year, we do have some of the players gone, but then we also don't have a Holly Rehder who's so passionate about this. Who's going to stand on the floor and take arrows for 3 hours?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. We need to find that person quick.
I don't know, and so I know that Representative Mike Stevens has said that, he would be happy to carry it. He's a pharmacist. Several have said that they'd be happy to carry it, but the vote has been so close in the House every year. I pray that we can get it done. I think the compromise bill is a wonderful bill. I think it was a great idea. I wish we would have thought of it years ago. But I'm hopeful, but I think that our counties that have not joined into the St. Louis County PDMP still need to be going full speed ahead.
Give us a quick list of your priorities in your next term as your first state Senate term.
Well, certainly prescription drug monitoring program is important to me and will continue to be important to me. I also think the cost of health care and the way that things are going with health care is just too much. It's too much for our businesses, it's too much for our individuals, it's too much for our families, and so much of this is only able to be fixed on the federal side, but I feel there has to be some ways that we can possibly increase our use of these concierge medical clinics where, and I don't know if you're familiar with those, but where people are paying monthly payment, you know, a monthly amount for however many family members, and then you go as many times as you need or whatever, and it's that set monthly amount. Whatever the solution is, I want us to look at, I'm going to look at what the other states are doing, find some solutions for Missouri to help bring down that cost. Price transparency is really important. That's one of the things we don't have across our hospitals. You know, I don't know if getting a procedure done in 𝐸𝐈𝐶ton is going to be less if I were to get it done at one of the hospitals in 𝐾APE, or vice versa. You know, I should be able to find that out before I go have a procedure. Those kind of things are very important, I think, to people and to me, my family. We need to be able to get our health costs under control.
I'm going to give you that as the last word. You can't beat that. Thank you for
agree.
coming, and congratulations.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Well, that wraps it up for tonight's show. Come back next Thursday for our last episode of this season when I'm joined by Dr. Carlos Vargas, president of Southeast Missouri State University, my alma mater. Also, we will be previewing our next documentary about Los Brisas restaurants, which started right here in Malden, Missouri